Hey everyone, welcome back to You Are What You Love. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and my guest today is someone I am so excited to have on the podcast because, truth be told, I have been stalking him on the internet for the past couple of years, and I'm very excited to be finally having a conversation sort of virtually face to face on this transatlantic Zoom call. So, my guest today is David K. Barnes, the wonderful writer of the very beloved audio fiction series Wooden Overcoats. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello. So, what are we talking about today? What is the piece of media that changed who you are as a person?
We are talking about today the media that changed me as a person and a TV show that I hope many of your listeners will already be aware of in some capacity. I'm here to talk about Doctor Who.
Oh, I do. Sometimes I'm like, people do know, right? I think it's pretty global now.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
got,
Oh,
it's a,
yes.
it's a wild one. Um, yeah, I think it got quite global when I was in middle school when the reboot started,
Yeah.
I think,
Yep.
because they were airing it on BBC America as
Hmm.
well as I want to say AMC started airing it as well, which is I don't know if you guys have AMC out there, but
No, afraid not.
they are, it's like The Walking Dead and a couple of
Oh,
others.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so they run quite a bit of the BBC programming here, which makes it pretty popular over here.
Yeah.
Um, so do you remember well, first of all, there's old Who and there's new Who, I
There is.
feel.
Yeah, of course.
So are you an old Who fan? Did you start watching before the reboot?
I did. This is the thing of, I remember Doctor Who um, as the series which was at that time A, not on, and B, not a show that you could really publicly admit to liking without being very teased at school.
Really?
Because it's hard to believe now. Now that it came back in 2005 and became incredibly popular and is still on today and shortly to be celebrating a 60th anniversary. But there was a time when Doctor Who was deeply, deeply uncool and not the sort of thing you could admit to liking. And I first got to watching it, I would have been about 8 or 9 years old. And I used to watch, because I was a very odd child even then, I used to watch a lot of old television programs on old television channels here in the UK. And there is one in particular called UK Gold, which specialised usually in old sitcoms and things, typically BBC. And I used to watch with my mum at dinner. And then once we were just chatting after one of these shows had finished, and then the Doctor Who title sequence started. And my mum said, "Oh, I used to watch this when I was a kid with your uncle. It was really pretty good. It was funny and scary and monsters. I think you'd like it." And I went, "Oh, okay," and started watching. And it was an episode from the mid 1970s called Robot, Episode 2 by Terrence Dicks, starring Tom Baker. It wasn't even episode 1. I'd missed the first one, clearly. It was episode 2. My mum explained that Doctor Who was a show of many different sort of individual serials, and each story would be 4 parts or 6 parts or 5 parts or whatever. And each one would end in a cliffhanger where something exciting happened. And in this one, there was a giant silver robot which was stealing master plan documents from the British government or something. There were lots of characters in it, and the military were there, and it was all fun and exciting. But in the middle of it all was this very, very strange, eccentric man in a long scarf and a frock coat and a hat, played, as I then later found out, by Tom Baker. And this was the Doctor, who I was told very reliably by my mum in the episode was an alien from somewhere in outer space who had 2 hearts and was marvelously eccentric and fun individual who'd always try to help people out. And the thing that drew me to this series, and I think the moment when I realized this was going to be something I was going to fall in love with, and which has remained with me ever since the age of 8, and I'm now sadly approaching my mid-30s, is it was just this character behaving, and I've always said this, behaving in a way that I'd never seen an adult behave before. Because adults are very serious things, very serious, and they can be crushingly dull to a child, sadly, as I've now also discovered being an adult myself. But in the middle of all this was Tom Baker's Doctor who was a little bit rude and a little bit brash and a bit childlike and offering people sweets. And when he didn't want to have a conversation, he'd just walk away from it. He wouldn't put up with it politely like we would. Just walk away. And there's a moment where he's having a chat with a character called the Brigadier, who was sort of his boss in those days. And they're talking about something that's gone on with this robot. And the doctor's had enough of this conversation, and he goes, "Well, good night, Brigadier." And he just falls asleep on on a lab bench and says, "Turn the light out, and turn the light off on your way out." And the Brigadier just walk on, turn the lights off, and the doctor's just given up in the middle of a conversation and gone to sleep on a bench. And at that moment, I thought, that's brilliant. I've never seen anyone do that. Why would you do that? And I spoke to my mum about this, and we watched the next day and the day after that. And then the day after that was a new adventure called The Ark in Space, and it carried on. And my mum would give me all these ideas of things that she remembered from her childhood. And she told me about Daleks and Cybermen and all this stuff. And I just sort of watched it, but and there's a lot to talk about in Doctor Who. There's a million things to talk about in Doctor Who, but if I can isolate that moment when I fell in love with it almost instantly, it was this very strange behaviour from this leading character who acted in a way that nobody else had ever acted before. And I thought, I want to be that. I want to be that guy. I want to be this person. And then it was only much later I realised that he wasn't even the first Doctor Who. There were 3 before Tom, and there were several after him. And at that time, there were only 8 Doctors. And then suddenly it came back in 2005. And since then, we've had many more.
Right.
And so that's the astonishing thing about a show that keeps rejuvenating itself with this wonderful character in the middle who keeps changing their appearance and personality. But they're always this wonderful character in the middle of it that you always want to spend time with. And that's where it started for me.
I love that it came from your mom being able to explain the backstory of the
Yes.
show. Like, if you had just sat and watched it, you would have had to sort of piece it together, which people do, and certainly it's been on for long enough that you can do that. But
Yeah.
I love that there's just this. I have just this vision of you and your mom sitting on the couch watching it, and your mom's sort of like, "Well, he has 2 hearts, and
Yeah.
well, he's an alien." But it's very cute.
Yeah. Because it's not at all obvious, I think, sometimes when you're watching it, if you don't know in advance. It's not like the Doctor walks around like, acting like an alien. I suppose in some ways he does because he's so strange and different. But, in many ways, Doctor Who often appears as a sort of very odd, eccentric person, usually British person. Usually either English or Scottish, but and the fact that they're an alien is entirely different from an alien, let's say you get in Star Wars or Star Trek or something. And what it makes the Doctor seem very alien to most people abroad is that they are very British, and and some of us do act like that. But it was, yes. I think that was it. It started off as a sort of family thing that me and my mother could enjoy together, and that because it was a television series that started in 1963, and I think she started watching it originally in the 70s, and it went on from then. And so many generations have grown up with it, and they all have the different memories of it. So it was something that bonded me and my mum were already very close, but we watched a lot of it together, and her parents remembered it.
Yeah.
And since then, many generations have, enjoyed it. And I'm sure there are some people whose first Doctor, that their children now, and their first Doctor is Jodie Whittaker.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's gone on. And so everyone has their own jumping on point for this wonderful show. And I think once you've got it, you never really go back, because it is the best TV show that's ever been created. And it just is. I mean, there's no contest. It's the best one. There might be other shows that are in some ways better or look better and are better. But really, the best one is still Doctor Who at the end of the day.
I actually do have to agree with you. I think I think what's really cool about Doctor Who is something you just spoke about, which is the generational kind of time. It's just the amount of generations that it's covered. How many families can say, "Oh, I watched that growing up," and then their children can watch it growing up, and then those children's children, blah blah blah. And I think and also with the reboot of it becoming very widely popular as well, where now everyone sort of has at least seen Christopher Eccleston and even if you haven't gone back and watched old Who. So there is something communal about that show that I don't think has necessarily been accomplished at least in fiction programming
I think
in a while. Yeah.
I suppose like Star Trek would be a sort of close one. I think that started, I think, with these mid to late 60s, perhaps, of the original. And that's also had different iterations, different tones and things. But there's nothing, I suppose I can't quite think of another TV show that's so radically reinvented itself so often as Doctor Who did. And I think that's it. Sometimes there used to be, it doesn't happen so much now because Doctor Who fans became immeasurably more fun once the new series came along. And everything got bright and sexy and happy again. But there was a time when the idea of being a true fan, the idea, what is a true fan? A true fan could reel off all the stories and all the Cybermen stories in order, which I can. Of course I can. I grew up with it from the age of 8. And I can do all that really geeky stuff. I can reel off every episode in order. But to be honest, in fact, just before this recording, I was actually watching one which I hadn't seen in a long time. I was watching a Doctor Who story from the 1980s called Time Lash, and it's dreadful. It's absolutely appalling television. And yet, of course I enjoy it. Of course I do. I'm a Doctor Who fan. Right. And I think that's the difference between being a fan and being a casual viewer of something. Is that if you're watching a TV show and you're enjoying it, you keep watching it. If you don't enjoy it, you stop. A Doctor Who fan will not only watch episodes they know probably aren't very good, they'll rewatch them. They'll buy them on DVD or Blu-ray so they can watch them again in better picture quality, as if seeing it slightly sharper is going to make the sets look any better. And that's it. I think being a true fan of Doctor Who just means you enjoy watching it. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter whether you've just seen the new series. You don't know who Patrick Troughton or John Pertwee or Peter Davison are. You've never heard of them. It doesn't matter if you've only started watching with the latest season of Jodie Whittaker's. So long as you sat there and you watched it and you enjoyed it, you want to see more of it. That's what makes you a fan of it. If you've been in any way entranced by it, and then even in some of the most cockeyed pieces of television created where the sets fall down and the actors clearly weren't given enough time to rehearse and God knows, and the story isn't quite working, there's something enjoyable in there because there is something magical about a series, about a blue cabinet that just takes you anywhere in time and space, and you can have fun adventures and then nip back inside and disappear somewhere else, and you can be on the, in the time of the Aztecs one moment and then on a spaceship in the far future the next, and all that sort of thing. That's what's fun about it. So even if one story is absolute rubbish, next week there's every possible chance it's going to be brilliant again, and that's something that's always worth preserving in Doctor Who.
I love that. So when you were watching, because my early memories of Doctor Who are sort of very legally watching it in America,
yes, of course,
at the same time as the British release.
Absolutely.
When very, very, very legally in my high school library with one of my best friends, and it still wasn't cool, at least out here. And it was still one of those things that you did sort of quietly watch on a laptop and talk about and all of that. But it sounds like when you were 8, it was on every day, like just all the time.
Yeah, there were particular. I think this particular TV channel would often have it at that time. It was like one 25-minute episode. All the old Who episodes are about 25 minutes compared to the new stuff, and it'd be one of those each weekday evening, and then they do a kind of omnibus on Saturday or Sunday. They would do like a whole serial, which is like 6 whatever episodes, all sort of smooshed together, the credits in between cut out, so it'd be like one long movie. And so yes, back then there was quite a lot of it. I mean, before then I don't think there was. Like for most people growing up with Doctor Who in say the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, they didn't repeat them on television, so if you missed it, you missed it, and then
good luck.
You'd have to buy the book. You bought the book of it, and then they had these things called the Target novelizations, which are just books of old Doctor Who. And so you go, I didn't see that one in 1971, but I'll buy the book and imagine it through that. Fortunately, by my age, even then we had TV repeats. So I watched all that, and I think for me, a real point where my mind was kind of blown by the history of this show was that having watched it for maybe a year and enjoyed Tom Baker's Doctor, there was a documentary. It was called More Than 30 Years in the TARDIS, this old 90s documentary, which is being repeated again. And it told sort of not quite the history of Doctor Who, but it looked at Doctor Who from its beginnings in the 60s onwards. And that was the point. Though my mum had said, other actors have played the part, I hadn't really taken that on board until I watched this documentary, and then it showed you all these clips of stories. Some of them were in black and white. They weren't even in colour. I thought, what's this? This is what? And there were these old things like Yeti and Cybermen outside St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and robots marching around Covent Garden that I'd never seen before. And then some of it looked really 80s, like incredibly 80s. And I hadn't seen any of that either. And like the hairstyles got bigger and then smaller again, and all this, and all the flares turned into this, and suddenly everyone was wearing leather. And it was all very exciting. And there are all these different stories which I hadn't realised, and I suddenly realised that what I'd seen and thought was already pretty damn impressive and amazing was like a tiny sliver of a show that had gone on for many decades either side. And And he said at that point, it was a show which, had, to all intents and purposes, stopped. It finished in 1989. I'm watching this in what would be, I suppose, probably the sort of mid to later 90s. I started, I would imagine. I think Paul McGann had been a doctor in a film, but I hadn't seen it, hadn't heard of it. And so even then, it was very exciting. So when it came back in 2005, and you go, oh, it's actually going to be here, and it came back, and it was good. Like, we weren't expecting that. We thought it'd come back and it would absolutely fail. It came back and it was really good. And we went, oh, and they've got a budget now. That's exciting. And everyone in it is treating it really seriously and still having fun. And, oh, this is amazing. And then it just carried on and on and on. And I think it reached, under David Tennant, became incredibly popular. I can't remember when Doctor Who became quite sort of, when it became more noteworthy in America. I'm not sure whether that happened under David Tennant or Matt Smith. I got the feeling it was around that.
I think, as far as I remember, so when I started watching, David Tennant was the Doctor, but I had gone back. A friend of mine that I'm still very close with today, we watched quite a lot of British television together.
Yeah.
And most of it was stuff it must have been through Tumblr or something like that, where we were like, oh, this looks cool. I don't know who this man is that's sort of being goofy and a little silly and on the internet. And we were internet kids, so you could get anything you were looking for.
Yeah.
So I know David Tennant was the Doctor when we started watching, which had to be sort of 2006, 2007.
Yep.
And it was not popular at the time. And it did not, it wasn't, it was airing on American television with a massive delay by 2010 for sure, because I was in high school, and it was sort of starting to air around then, when it was definitely like you could watch it on BBC America, but it was months after. So if you were on the internet, you've spoiled everything. I used to get so upset. I was like, I don't understand. I'm sure there are reasons. Now I've learned what the reasons are, and how syndication works, and how sort of the global licensing works. But I remember as a kid being like, don't you understand that I am going to find out what happens against my will? And you're forcing me to watch it not where you want me to watch it. But yeah, I think during David Tennant is when we became very aware of it, at least where I lived. And then Matt Smith afterwards, I think, is when people maybe became more mainstream in America.
I got that sense by the 50th, because there was that 50th anniversary special with David Tennant and Matt Smith meet up, and John Hurt is there suddenly. And around about that time, I certainly got the sense that Doctor Who was trying to conquer the world. With the sort of 50th anniversary celebrations, and I think there were lots more targeted repeats in America with like mini documentaries about all the doctors, and they do this, that, and the other. I got the sense that they were really going, look, Doctor Who was popular in America for a while. We need to make it really popular again in America.
I think there was also just sort of around that same time, just a boom of like obsession with British culture and British television in America, especially with teenage girls, I would say. And I don't know if it's that they were casting hotties as the Doctor or what it was, but it was definitely booming, because it was Doctor Who was big, Merlin was big. I think that's also maybe when Netflix started streaming for the first time, and they had quite a bit of British programming that you could watch. So I think around that time is when that started, and it's also, I would argue, around the time that teen television in America was starting to get really bad. And so I think there was sort of this open space for teenagers to be like looking for something that they could say like, oh, I have my nerdy thing. Because teen TV was becoming very CW-ified. It was becoming very like, kids out drinking and having sex, and if you weren't that kid, it was not as exciting anymore. There wasn't, there wasn't, as you said, that moment of I want to be that person. I was like, oh, she looks like she's when is she going to school? Like I would love to know.
I think some ways sort of Doctor Who was a gloriously irresponsible show, despite the fact it's all about helping people and compassion, etc. It is ultimately about people who don't really need to settle down anywhere. Like if you don't like a place, you just get back in your police box, you fly away and do something else. But that's also what we all want, isn't it? At some point in our lives, we go, it wouldn't be great to suddenly actually just fly off. And especially if you're a kid. And if you're a kid like myself growing up, I was always one of those children who would, study very hard and and I was at a school where not many people did study very hard, and so I was always a bit of an outcast. And so the idea that you could jump in a small box, not even, everyone else wanted spaceships that were massive. And I go, no, you don't want one of them because you can't get that in a small bedroom. The TARDIS can land anywhere. Like it could appear in the middle of my bedroom, and I could jump in and I could go off on an adventure. That's more exciting than a massive spaceship showing up and parking on your lawn.
Absolutely.
And that's what I sort of, I really sort of wanted from Doctor Who was, is that sense of escape and adventure. But also, and I think this happens with everyone in their first Doctor, whether it's, I think David Tennant is now probably the most iconic Doctor of certainly of the new generation, in the way that Tom Baker remains one of the most iconic probably of the older stuff. But it's the sense of, actually being smart and being clever is something that you can still aspire to be. It doesn't make you tragically uncool and somebody who should be shoved to the side by your peers. It's really refreshing to see a character. And that was definitely for me, was that a lot of my, contemporaries when I was a child, they liked really, if they could get to see violent films, they would certainly watch them. And they want characters like that. Or, I never wanted to side with the hero at the biggest gun who could fight the best or kill effectively. I liked the fact that the Doctor didn't want to do that. The Doctor was a hero who would try to reason with people and try to help people. And yes, at the end of the day, often the options ran out and he just blew up the Daleks or blew up the Cybermen or whoever. And yes, and surely blew them away quite often. But at least he tried. At least he tried to find a way which was better. And he was clever. The Doctor was a clever character and funny and knew lots of things about history and art and science. And all those things are brilliant. And suddenly there's a character that you can look up to. But they're not perfect because the Doctor loses their temper or they trip up and fall into a bog or whatever. They're a fun character, and every version of the Doctor is different. But they've all got that central ethos of a person who they should aspire to do the right thing, which is usually the most compassionate thing. It's not following what the rules are, but it is what is the most compassionate thing. What is the thing that's going to bring the most a sense of love, and what's going to sort of help people genuinely the most. But they're not pious. They don't tend to speechify. The Doctor just tries to get on with it and usually tells lots of jokes. That's really important. Doctor Who's got to be funny, and the Doctor is funny. They're a very funny character. Either they're in on the joke and they're saying a funny joke, or the joke's being played on them and they've fallen into a swimming pool. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The Doctor is a fun character. You want to be with them. You want to be them. And I think that's a very important as a character, no matter who's playing them. And they need a certain watchability, but you just need to know that the Doctor's on your side, and that the Doctor isn't the sort of person who at school would side with the bullies and make fun of you. The Doctor would always be there defending you and go, don't listen to them. Come on, jump in the TARDIS and we'll fly away to Saturn. That's what you want from the character.
This might be a silly question, but did kids play Doctor Who as much as make believe, or we played whatever I think when I was a kid we played a lot of Totally Spies, which was like a cartoon,
Yeah. I don't think I think when Doctor Who came back, I'm told there was a lot of that, but when Doctor Who came back, I was at what we in the UK call college, which is sort of the 2 years you do before you go to university. So I was too old to be at the point where you would sort of play games, in break. But I was certainly told by those who had younger siblings and all the rest of that, yes, Doctor Who was suddenly something that people were pretending to be in the playground, and people were being Rose, Tyler, and the Doctor, and Daleks, Weeping Angels, and so on. The Weeping Angels were perfect. I mean, obviously they're scary on television, but the Weeping Angels are a perfect schoolyard game. You can pretend to be a Dalek or a Cyberman or a Sontaran or a Quark or whatever, but a Weeping Angel has it turns around, you've got to freeze in place and make sure you don't blink. It's got its own rules of its own schoolyard game pre-packaged. It's a genius idea for a monster. And I think that was so popular. I wish, in many ways, I had been a child during that renaissance of Doctor Who, where you could talk about it in the schoolyard rather than keep it a sort of shameful secret as I had to. But whilst I wish I had that, I'm glad a lot of people did have that. I'm glad that people have gone on to. I'm glad that people probably had that in the 60s and the 70s. I begrudge the fact I didn't, but that's not anyone's fault apart from the BBC for not bringing it back earlier. But
Yeah, if they could have just gotten it together.
yeah, if Russell T Davies could just come along about 10 years earlier and sort it out for me, that'd have been
What a
great.
brilliant man,
Oh
as
yes,
well.
oh yes,
That was, I was actually curious about kind of your feelings about this. I think in the Doctor Who world, there's a bit of a debate when it comes to who's sort of at the helm.
yes,
And I say bit, and that's probably very polite and
yes,
when it comes to so now we've had sort of Russell T Davies took the helm at the beginning, and now he's
yeah,
coming back. And I
yes.
am curious about how you feel about people taking over. Obviously, Russell T Davies had to take on something that was very important to you as a child
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and do something that seems like you're quite happy with it.
Yes, I think it's the thing about Doctor Who as a show, which makes it very exciting, is that it is really something like 30 different TV shows in one.
Mm.
Sometimes all happening at the same time, but more usually sort of sequential. So if you watch an episode from John Pertwee's time, he's the Doctor in the early 70s, and you watched one episode or one story from that, and then you watched one from, say, certainly from 10 years later, it'd be totally different. But if you watched one from even 4 years later, it'd be totally different. During I think Tom Baker, who was still the longest running Doctor, about sort of certainly 7 seasons, about 7 or 8 years in the mid to late 70s, he had three producers, so three showrunners, if you like. We didn't have showrunners back then, but you back then, Doctor Who was sort of, you had the producer and you had the script editor, and they were both, the two of them were kind of in charge of the tone of the show. And during Tom Baker's time, the first few years of this sort of really scary horror show, where the whole point of the show is to scare children and terrify them with stories based on Edgar Allan Poe and Frankenstein and all the old monster movies. And it's terrifying stuff for kids in the 70s. And then they go, oh, we can't do that anymore. People are complaining. It's too scary and violent. What do we do? And they made it into a comedy. And suddenly Doctor Who becomes a comedy show. For a time, script edited by Douglas Adams. At the time that he's starting Hitchhikers, Douglas Adams is moonlighting on Doctor Who, and he writes several scripts, and he's in charge of the show for a year, basically.
Oh my goodness.
He's there for a year. It's one of my favorite seasons of the show. Doctor Who is very funny. And there's always wonderful ideas, and it's very comedically based. There's a story called City of Death, which is rightly regarded as one of the pinnacles of the show, where Doctor Who goes to France, and there's a time-traveling alien splintered through time who's getting Leonardo da Vinci to do this, that, and the other, and forge numerous copies of the Mona Lisa. And John Cleese turns up very briefly. It's a bizarre story and very, very funny. It's just a strange show. And then once again, suddenly the producer changes, and it suddenly becomes a sort of very hard sci-fi, big ideas, but very, very serious. And suddenly it's in the 80s, and the special effects have changed again. And you've realised that even in the time it's taken this one lead actor to be the Doctor, the show has changed itself so entirely differently 3 times. It's basically a different show.
Mm.
And I think that's the thing with Doctor Who, is that I always say that even if you, for whatever reason, don't like what the particular producer or showrunner is doing with it, if you just wait a few years, if you really don't like it that much, you don't want to watch it, just stop watching it. Don't complain about it. Just go, well, okay, it's turned into something else. Like, there is no particular reason why, if you really like a Doctor Who series because it's filled with scary ghost stories, why you might want to enjoy it when it's suddenly about something totally different. And that's what it often does. You can just take a pause from it and wander away. I usually find, to be honest, even an era of Doctor Who that one might not have enjoyed at the time is always much better in retrospect, because suddenly it's much easier to see other things that you weren't so mad on before. I think there were times, even in David Tennant's era, which at the time I wasn't as mad on as I might have been. But when, with hindsight, you just go, well, that's just a different version of the series. And so the things that you didn't like kind of get very minimized. And the things that you love are much, much bigger. And you just focus on that. And you go, yeah, well, of course, I wasn't mad I didn't like that episode or that episode, but you still had Blink, you still had, Human Nature. You still had the ones where all the companions came back and Davros suddenly invaded Earth,
Yes.
and Bernard Cribbin shot a Dalek with a paintball gun. And you go, where else would this happen on any other program? Like, and every episode of Doctor Who, whether or not it's a great piece of television or not, and a lot of them aren't, every episode has something wonderful in it. And that's a good point. So I am very excited about Russell T Davies coming back. Not necessarily because I think the show needs something totally different now, but I liked what he did before. And Russell T Davies is a very canny showrunner. The one thing he's not going to do is do Doctor Who exactly the way he did before. He's going to do a totally new version of it with however many years' experience, add accrue to what he already had. I'm looking forward to it. Very exciting. I'm looking forward to the new Doctor. But of course, it's very sad to see the old Doctor go. It's a really weird thing. You don't want to see them go, but you want to see the next one. I mean, Doctor Who fans are very fickle. You miss the old Doctor terribly for 10 minutes, and then you forgot they ever existed because there's the new one.
I will say, I think I agree with you until it's like the first Doctor that you become heavily attached to.
Yeah.
It took me 2 seasons of Matt Smith
Yeah.
to be happy. Like I
Yeah.
really I was upset. Don't understand why
quite
we're
right.
watching this man. And he's great. He does a great job, but
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely fair. I think this is it. I think if I'd been watching the show just in the same way, if it has been like sort of Tom Baker for several years and suddenly he falls off a radio telescope tower and turns into Peter Davison from All Creatures Great and Small, and I'd have gone, what's happening? Where's my Doctor gone? Who is this guy? Why is he suddenly dressed as a cricketer? What's he doing? Why is he wearing celery on his lapel? What's happening? I want the scarf and the jelly babies back. And I probably would have been really not into Peter Davison for a couple of years, despite the fact he's doing a really, really good job.
Right.
And I think that's it. You do get attached. And then once you are a few Doctors down, it suddenly just becomes part of the show. You miss that person who's gone. But you go, well, I know the Doctor Who's going to carry on in a different way. And I think, sometimes people ask, what's a good jumping on point for Doctor Who? And it's quite hard because most Doctors' first episodes are usually busy dealing with the stuff that happened at the end of the previous Doctor's world. I think like David Tennant's first episode and Peter Capaldi's first episodes, they're both the Doctor in the world of the previous incarnation. So it's like, here's David Tennant with Rose Tyler's family, who we got to know with Eccleston.
Right.
I think Matt Smith's first episode is actually a pretty good one. I think The 11th Hour is a good episode. It's Stephen Moffat's first one as showrunner. I think it's fun. Olivia Colman's in there, which is lovely.
True. Oh my gosh.
Matt Smith is one of my favourite Doctors. He really was somebody who I just thought, oh, you are wonderful. You are amazing. I believe that you are 900 years old or whatever. But despite the fact you look as if you're in your mid-20s.
Yeah.
I think he's great. And I think it's very, very funny. I do think the episodes that come afterwards are very good. I do think actually that Matt Smith's first season, I think might still be my favourite overall season of Doctor Who because I think it's very
hot takes.
I just like those episodes, and even then they're not all great ones. There's that really bizarre one with the Daleks knowing Winston Churchill, which yes, you have a Dalek saying, "Would you like some tea?" It's worth it for that alone, but the episode doesn't really hold together. There's the episodes of the Silurians. They don't quite work either, but there's stuff in there. But then you've also got wonderful moments. The Weeping Angel story is terrific. You have the Amy's Choice with lovely Toby Jones as an evil dream lord calling the Doctor a floppy-haired wuss and stuff, and you go, that's wacky. I'm not sure why this is happening. Glad it is. You have a series with where the entire universe is destroyed at the very end, and there's stuff with Stonehenge, and all the monsters are here, and and Rory's now a Roman Auton. What's happening? I don't know. Let's do an episode set in the museum afterwards with a stone Dalek. Okay, and I think it's wonderful. I just think it's a wonderful, magical, funny ride, and I think Matt Smith is brilliant. And I just love that season. I think it's a good jumping on point for anyone who hasn't seen it. Equally, probably a good jumping on point is whatever season is on TV at the moment or the next one.
Yeah.
Because it is a show that you should ideally be able to get on board with. And if there's, without knowing much about it, beyond what the TARDIS is, it's a time machine. Bigger on the inside than the outside. It looks like a blue police box from the 60s. Don't know what a police box is? Nobody does anymore. That's fine. The Doctor's an alien. And they're a bit weird and they're great. Here are some friends of his, or hers, or theirs, whoever's playing the part. There are robots over there. Some of them have got green blobs in them. You worry about that later. It's fine. All you need to know is it's going to be fun. And then you get on with it. that's the jumping on point, is just, let's see what happens. And if the set falls apart, half the time that will have happened on purpose. Yeah.
The other half, we're making it work.
Yeah. Half the time it just happened, they went, well, don't have time to refilm that. We'll just make it work.
Yeah, it's so funny because I have never heard someone say start with Matt Smith,
Yeah,
and maybe that's just the bias of everyone having grown up with David Tennant and
of
perhaps
course.
having my biases against that first season that I should really go back and enjoy without my teenage upsetness of over just nothing,
Yeah,
over the core concept of the show. That's always the funniest part to me, where the core concept is this man will regenerate, or no longer just this man,
yeah,
will regenerate into another actor, and, every time it happens, there's an outrage to some degree, and it's like,
of
well,
course.
that's sort of it's the whole point.
Yeah.
It
No,
happens.
I think David Tennant's era works really, really well. I think it's the sort where the thing about the Russell T Davies years is that obviously, like most of the eras, that they work as a really good unit, and so you kind
Mhm.
of you can start with Tennant as you did, and then jump
Yeah.
back to Eccleston. But a lot of and I think you can start maybe with Tennant's first season, but there are some episodes which are still very much dealing with stuff that happened the season before. And
Mm.
say you started with season 4 where he's with Donna, played by Catherine Tate, and I think that's a tremendous run of episodes, and I think it's still Doctor Who in some ways at its most popular zenith, certainly in the UK, I think, even before the 50th anniversary. I think the ending of season 4 was something that had the biggest viewing figures in the UK, the largest audience in the UK, and everyone was talking about it. It was just this biggest thing on television. I mean, you couldn't, for someone who had grown up with Doctor Who as this cancelled show that no one could talk about in polite society, it was it was mind blowing to see that Doctor Who could be so popular again. But even then, if you watch season 4, it's got a companion returning from the previous season, and then the end of the
Yeah.
season is all about Rose coming back from this. And so it's a show wrapped up in its own history, knowing that most of its audience will have grown up with that history over the previous few years. So I think, in a way, Matt Smith's first season, because it's such a clean start and a clean break, it's a good one to start with and just to pick it up. And then you could jump back to David Tennant in the same way as, but you jump back to Eccleston. I probably wouldn't necessarily advise someone starting. I remember when I uh, first met my partner, and she found out very early on that I'm a Doctor Who fan, of course, when she looked at my the shelves and saw them filled with Doctor Who DVDs and little figures of all the Doctors on the shelf, and sort of sussed quite early on. And she said, "Well, Doctor Who's clearly very important to you. Why don't we watch it from the beginning?" And I said,
Oh.
You don't quite know what you mean there." And said, "Oh, I know it used to be on before." Or David Tennant, or that, or as the older Doctors, no, I mean, let's start from the beginning. I go, "Oh, yeah. Do you know how many episodes there are?" I said, "No, I don't know. Was it like a few seasons, here and there?" I went, well, there's around about sort of 600, 700 episodes before Eccleston. She went, "What?" I went, "Yeah. I'll show you the first episode, and this creaky piece of television from 1963, which involves the Doctor's a very cranky old man and 2 school teachers interested in their pupil and following her home. That hasn't aged well.
Oh
And
god.
and the story's all about cavemen grunting and killing each other. And it's there is no particular reason, shall we say, in the year 2022, why somebody coming to Doctor Who for the first time would be advised to start with 1963's Doctor Who. I love it. Of course I do. I love William Hartnell as Doctor. But you would be advised not to start from the very beginning. Old Doctor Who is something you dip into here and there. If you're not
Mm.
used to it, just dip into it here and there. See what happened on, different stories all over the place. It's a wonderful show. William Hartnell's time as Doctor Who, they didn't know what the show was. And so they're
Mm.
experimenting all the time. And so even then, you can make it sound very exciting by saying, you've got some stories where the Daleks are invading Earth for the very first time. And then there is an alien planet filled with giant insects. And then there's a story which is about the Trojan War. And then there's a comedy musical set in the Wild West. Yes, there is. Doctor Who and the Gunfighters. Go and look that up. Or don't. You might think it's awful. A lot of people did. It was one of the most unpopular Doctor Who stories of all time. I love it. It's Doctor Who goes to get his tooth pulled at a dentist's, and then goes to a pub in the Wild West for a drink of milk, and then gets mistaken for Doc Holliday, and the gunfight of the OK Corral suddenly happens, and there are songs, and no one knows why. It happened for 4 weeks in the 1960s, and we still have it, and now you can get it on DVD or watch it online. It shouldn't be anyone's first Doctor Who. Maybe make it your 700th Doctor Who. I don't know, but it is there. And you can make it, will be a 700th. There, God knows how many stories there are now. But there is a lot of Doctor Who out there. I would start with the newer stuff, but the fact that it's there at all. And one thing I do love about New Doctor Who is that it's not ashamed of its roots. It doesn't, I think Peter Capaldi's last episode is about him going back to when the first Doctor regenerated and having an adventure with a recast first Doctor. And you think, yeah, sure, why not? Absolutely, why not? Why not reference a story with an episode we don't even have anymore? Like, we don't have the 10th Planet Part 4. It was lost. We have clips from it. But why not base an episode in the mid, in the early 2020s or whenever it was on this old episode? It's Doctor Who. It can do what it wants. Like, all right.
Yeah. I think there's something really cool, and I wonder how much it's sort of influenced you as someone who ultimately became a writer yourself.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to say there's no rules to Doctor Who, but I remember very vividly Stephen Moffat allowed a gun to be fired inside the TARDIS, and that was absolute outrage to so many people
Yes.
because it had
Yeah.
broken a rule. But overall, there aren't. I mean, I guess even in that instance, there aren't rules to Doctor Who.
No.
You can do what you want.
You can. I think there are, what are the stories you can't do? You can't allow the Doctor to do something so ethically awful that you would just hate the character. That's the sort of one rule. There are certain things, if Doctor Who joined the alt-right, we would go, oh no, that'd be dreadful. But in terms of genre of story, Doctor Who can be it can be a mystery story, it can be a comedy, it can be an action feature, it can be a strange sort of minimalist piece. It can do anything. And the weird thing about Doctor Who, like you said there about a gun being fired in the TARDIS, and of course, as we all know, the inside of the TARDIS exists in a state of temporal grace where weapons shouldn't be allowed to be fired, except in the stories where it would be exciting for that to happen, and then you allow it to happen. Of course you do. Why would you not do that? And the rules of Doctor, there is no other show I know where the rules were made up, forgotten, thrown out so often as Doctor Who. And it was only when Doctor Who fandom became a thing, like a regimented thing in, I think, around the 1980s, that the idea that there was a holy writ of what Doctor Who is happened. And it was the worst thing that could have happened to Doctor Who. Because it was, Gallifrey as a planet isn't named until the 11th season of Doctor Who on screen. We don't hear about the Time Lords until season 6. They hadn't worked it out before then. They didn't need to know, really. And they just sort of made stuff up as they went. The idea of the Doctor having two hearts is, and this is something, especially as a writer, I find this kind of fascinating. The idea of the Doctor, I think, having two hearts, I think first happens in John Pertwee's first story. It's the first story of the 1970s. The Doctor has landed, he's just regenerated, and he's faint and he falls down he just faints, and he's found and taken to a hospital. But his old friend, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who has met Patrick Troughton's second Doctor in the year before, hears, there's a mysterious chap has just turned up out of nowhere, called the Doctor, and there's a blue police box, and he goes to investigate it, and him meeting the Doctor again and realising he's changed his face is what kickstarts the story. And the writers sat there and gone, why on earth would this army guy be interested in this person in a random hospital miles and miles away? What would and he goes, I know, I'll make sure the patient is so strange that it would excite a media frenzy. I'll say he's got two hearts. And a porter overhears a doctor telling another doctor that our Doctor has two hearts, and the porter goes up and brings up the local journalists and all the newspapers and says, I've heard there's somebody who's got two hearts. Are you interested? And lots of journalists come, and that brings the Brigadier there because he's heard there's an alien with two hearts, and he realises his old friend the Doctor, and then a story happens. And it's just a tiny detail. It's a writer working out how to plot a script, probably late at night, probably after a few drinks, going, I don't know how to make this work. Another pot of coffee, goes, he's got two hearts, that'll do, writes it into the script. And now that writer, on a deadline, trying to plot a script, makes up a detail out of nowhere in the 7th season of the series on the 3rd Doctor, And that one fact is one of the things that we all know about Doctor Who decades later.
Right.
That's how Doctor Who lore happens. That's how all lore should happen. It shouldn't be pre-planned from the start. It should be people making it up as they go along, panicking, constantly panicking. That's how the best discoveries happen, panicking. And that's what Doctor Who is. It's people panicking and throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. And then if it makes for an exciting story, you go at it more and you carry on doing it. That's how we did, how I did Wooden Overcoats. For any of the listeners who know what Wooden Overcoats is, a sitcom, a podcast sitcom, you get it for free right now. Download it right now. It's about rival.
And if you haven't, you must. It
You
is
must.
truly, truly, truly incredible.
It's a sitcom about rival undertakers on an island which is supposedly a mile wide, and yet also includes an impossible number of things which we never draw attention to. At the very beginning of the series, I decided that the island of Piffling should have whatever we needed to tell a funny story that week. And so the island of Piffling has a village and then another village, and then it also has a safari park, and it has mountains, and it has an incredibly dense wood, and it's got all these buildings, and the Belgian ambassador is there in his embassy. And we have all these things that happen, an impossible number of things, rather like a TARDIS, because I thought, I quite like how Doctor Who made it up as it went along. I think that's how it should work. I think that's how it should work. It should just go along like that. And yeah, that's something which I love about the show, and I think that's why people who get hung up on the tiny details, I don't think you should. I think you should get hung on the big details. If the Doctor did something massively out of character, and sometimes you will get that when a story ends in the way that I think, for instance, there was a story early in Jodie Whittaker's run, one of the giant spiders, and there's a bit where the plan is, I think, to bring lots of spiders in a small place and then sort of allow them essentially to either suffocate or starve to death in a cellar. Whereas another character, the character we don't like, says, why don't we just shoot them? And of course, shooting them is not a very good solution. But also, allowing them to starve to death over a period of time is not a very humane solution either. So the ethics and the morality of that are very suspect. And that's more when I think it's a problem, when the story doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
Because that goes against the Doctor's nature, someone who's very compassionate and clever and should know that this is not the right idea. And that's a problem. Guns going off in the TARDIS or how many slats are on the side of a Dalek, that doesn't bother me. It shouldn't bother anyone, really.
Yeah.
If it does, fine. People have fun debating it. So long as it's fun, so long as it is fun, so long as people are genuinely having fun debating it, it doesn't become a sort of something that keeps you up at night and you start writing angry letters and angry emails. That's when it gets too much. Don't do
Dear
that.
Stephen.
Yeah. What were you thinking when? And he goes, what he was thinking was, I don't have enough time. I need to finish this script by 11 o'clock. That's what he was thinking.
Yeah, I think I think there's something really great about the idea of I have no idea, now I'll throw this at the wall. And now it is the thing, it is one of the first things David Tennant says when he regenerates is to like both hearts. And so I think there is something just really wonderful about how many hands have touched Doctor Who and how
Yes.
many just things have gone into it, how many people have gone into a state of panic.
Yeah.
And I imagine that panic has gotten heightened as it's gotten more popular.
Oh,
well.
absolutely. I've read I think it's called The Writer's Tale, a book which is Russell T Davies and emails with journalist, I think Benjamin Cook, of Doctor Who magazine Parish. And it's a series of emails back and forth during the development of season 4 of David Tennant and the specials and everything up to David Tennant's regeneration. And it's, they always say, if you want to be a writer of especially in a script writer, read that. And if at the end of it you still want to be a writer, then you probably will become, because any sensible person would read and go, no, I'm not going to do this. This is awful. This Russell T Davies appears to be in absolute agony. He's up till like 5 a.m. trying to write a script and then doing this and that. And he's absolutely saying, I hate myself. I'm awful. I can't think up anything. And then the next day he goes, I thought of it. It's all there. It's going to be marvelous. Just this. And it is terrific. And you see how much effort goes into Doctor Who and how much comes from people just going, this. And then suddenly maybe it works. I think Blink, which is still one of the most popular Doctor episodes of all time, I think I'm right in saying that was a second draft script. Stephen Moffat just ran out of time. And I think I'm right in saying it was a second draft. I'm sure that Russell T Davies would have done some edits and things afterwards.
Of course.
But the script that Stephen Moffat turned in was essentially a second draft, when normally should have been like a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or whatever it was. But they just ran out of time and it suddenly did this. And, it was really flying by the seat of the trousers trying to get this. And ends up with one of the most celebrated 50 minutes of Doctor Who ever.
Yes.
It's astonishing. And I think a lot of Russell T Davies' season finales were written in a terrible hurry. I think everyone's season finales are written in a terrible hurry. Mine certainly are, on Wooden Overcoats and anything else. They're the things you leave till last, and you really rely on this sort of adrenaline rush and excitement, and sort of almost madness overtakes you as you're just throwing everything you can at it and just writing and writing and writing. And then they end up being too long, which is why a lot of season finales are 20 minutes too long. But that's the sort of the grip and the excitement, I think, in making it. And I think as a writer, Doctor Who has been a huge influence on me. Partly, I have written Doctor Who. I've written Doctor Who for Big Finish, the audio company. And so I have done some Doctor Whos. I've written for some of the Doctors as well. I've written for Christopher Eccleston quite recently and had that released. So I've written Doctor Who. But beyond that, I think the Doctor Who was a show which is, I think the structure of Doctor Who, I think the fact things always need to be happening in Doctor Who, the fact that there's adventure with a forward momentum. I think I read somewhere, Doctor Who is a show that can survive being bad, but it can't survive being boring. And I think that's very important. And there is, I'd say, there's a lot of bad Doctor Who, but a lot of the bad Doctor Who is also really quite enjoyable and fun. The worst stories are the boring ones, the ones you can't remember, or you can't remember even as you're watching it. Doctor Who always has incidents and always has things going on, but it's also very funny. And a lot of the humour should serve the drama. It shouldn't just be scary, funny, but scary. It should also be meshing at the same time. And Stephen Moffat was very good for that. So I always like to have I always try to work out the plot. I always like to do the structure of it. I always like a certain momentum. I don't tend to try and write scenes where people are just sitting around, just sort of filling in time. I always like them to be debating a problem or something they've got to be doing. But it's also the humour of it. I think the humour of Doctor Who is very offbeat. And I often think Doctor Who, in many ways, is the funniest show on television, even funnier than most actual comedies. Because the comedy is always in service to the character or the story or the plot, and no one's ever trying to just come up with a joke for the sake of a joke. If you don't need the joke, you just get rid of it. But if you can have a joke, great, throw it in. And I think that style of it has always appealed to me as a writer. And so and the more you read about and the behind the scenes, the more you realise how fascinating it's those people who, I think a lot of people who become Doctor Who fans become excited about TV production and things, because you always want to find out, what's a script editor? What's a production assistant do? And you get into it, and then you discover the background of Doctor Who. And I realised when I got into the arts, when I came to London, I became a writer, and I discovered that being a Doctor Who fan was the sort of, it was almost like a bit like the Freemasons. Like suddenly when you discover someone's a Doctor Who fan, there was a sudden instant connection. You go, oh really? What's your favourite Doctor? And you try to guess. And then suddenly it seemed that everyone in TV development was a Doctor Who fan and had been even before the new series. And suddenly and it gave you a sort of a shortcut to discussion. And they got into TV because they're interested in Doctor Who when they were a kid.
Right.
That happens a lot. And I think it happens a lot with writers more generally, and directors and actors, and obviously in podcasting and everything. I think there are a lot of Doctor Who fans in podcasting. I'm fairly sure.
Yeah. I would hazard a bet on that one. I believe you would be right. I think something that is really cool about Doctor Who, and it's cool to hear you get to say the same thing. I remember one of the things that hooked me on Doctor Who was actually watching interviews, which felt very accessible, weirdly, for a show that wasn't airing in America at the time, and being able to kind of find the DVD extras and the behind the scenes interviews. And one of them that stuck out was David Tennant talking about how he had grown up watching Doctor Who and then getting to play the Doctor. And it sounds like you got to have a very similar kind of, I remember thinking that is so cool, and I'm so jealous. And I don't know, I think that was far before I was interested in working for television. That was far before I wanted to be a writer. I was avidly against having a career in the arts at the time. And
it's very wise. I mean, you should listen to yourself.
Really should have, yes. There's an alternate universe where I am programming computers and doing quite well for myself. It's we can probably blame Doctor Who for that, but but I do remember feeling what a cool thing to get to be obsessed with something and then get to make that something.
Mm, mm.
And so what was it like when you got to write for Doctor Who for the first time?
It was very, because the Big Finish company is one that I had, bought a number of their releases back when I was in my teens. In fact, I remember once I was at a Big Finish party, and I was introduced to a writer who had written some of the scripts that some of the stories I'd enjoyed that had been released, about 10 years earlier. These stories that had been released when I was still at school. And I said, oh, I loved, the name of the story. I loved it. But I listened, I bought it when I was at school. And I went, oh, you've made me feel so old. And I went, yes, of course. But now people do that to me. Like people, I get a number of Wooden Overcoats listeners who say, oh, I started listening to Wooden Overcoats when I was at school and it finished when I was at university. And I went, oh, blimey, I'm now part of people's youths and childhoods, etc. So, and that makes me feel old. But that's the way things are. When I got to write for Doctor Who, it was a very. The first thing is you imagine. I think there are some writers who will have boundless ideas of, oh, I've always wanted to see Doctor Who do X, Y, and Z. And there are those like me who've gone, Doctor Who's been on for a long time. Hasn't it done every story by now? And you really have to rack your brains for something. And you realize that in the end, there's probably only really like 6 Doctor Who stories, and they've just been repeated in lots of different ways, like any fiction. And I was advised, just come up with something that you find interesting and then just go at it and don't worry. And the way you tell that story will make it different from the way it's been done before. I went, okay, let's just trust to instinct and trust to the voice. And the first one I did was the Dalek Occupation of Winter, which I did the best I could. And I thought, I think this is exciting and funny and dramatic, and it's got a story in there, and it's about a society where the Daleks have arrived in this sort of far-flung society of people. And these people, their entire economy is built around making Daleks, but they have no idea that the Daleks are an evil force of destruction. They just think they're a bunch of robots who have lots of resources, and the Daleks pretend to be quite sort of, not exactly nice, but certainly sort of, not evil, scheming conquerors. And it's the Doctor and his companion's job to try and point out and reveal that, no, the Daleks are monstrous, and you've actually been creating armies that have been destroying countless people across the universe, and you don't realize it. And, it had lots of horrible bits and scary bits and funny bits. And I had no idea whether it would do well or not. And then it was released, and lots of people seemed to like it. Those who listened to it said, oh, this is a really good script. And Big Finish, it liked it, and they gave me more. And I was, again, I think with any script, I have to find something I'm excited about and a theme I want to investigate. It's never just about, oh, let's put that Doctor and the Daleks or whatever together and see what happens. I want to have something to investigate, as with any other script, and to then root it in the main characters. But it was something, I think if I tried to think about it too much, I became a bit overwhelmed. I just had to kind of put aside the part of me which was like a 9-year-old child going, you're writing Doctor Who, that's amazing. You're literally writing. I think I did have a thrill of excitement when I wrote my very first Exterminate in a Dalek script.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And when I wrote the TARDIS dematerializes and all that kind of thing, and knowing that this would happen, and the Doctor Who theme tune and the cliffhangers. But I had to kind of shut that off and just approach this as if I was doing any other script, and just, do a good professional job, find something to be excited by, try to make, my rule for writing any script, as I say, your basic job is to write dialogue that makes the actors glad they turned up for work in the morning. That's all you have to do. Is if the actors look at the script and go, oh, I'm going to enjoy doing this scene, you've done your job. And it's their job and the director's job and everybody else's job to make sure it's something that's fit for television or fit for podcasting or fit for the stage. But I just tried to concentrate on that, and realised again in writing it how much my own sense of humour has been influenced by Doctor Who, because I've put in lots of jokes and they'd all be usually quite, dark humour.
Yeah.
And I did, I've written some scripts. They haven't yet been written. There's a really bizarre thing with sometimes a Big Finish where you write and develop and record a script years before it's released. I wrote a Doctor Who in 2018. It's being released in 2025. Some of them really are sort of,
that's a long,
it's a long time.
Oh, my goodness.
But I've written a few for Tom Baker, who was, of course, my favourite Doctor growing up, and still probably is my favourite Doctor of all, because he was my first. And I thought, you're in a studio listening to Tom Baker doing dialogue you wrote. And Doctor Who, he was my hero when I was 9 years old, 10 years old, at a time in my life when I had friends, but not that many. And home life started to get a bit trickier when my parents split up. And,
Mm.
I was a clever kid who was bullied at school and all the rest of it. But there was always this figure in a blue police box. No matter what his face looked like, he was always there. Um, and as the Doctor's gone on, say it's no matter what their face looks like, his, her, their, whoever's playing the part. Um, it was incredible to realize and just take a step back from myself and go, you've written a script for your childhood hero. And Doctor Who still is, it's, I suppose I'm not sure if it ever became fashionable to idolize a fictional person as opposed to real people. But it's tricky, it's hard for any real person to quite be as good as the Doctor, because the
Yeah.
Doctor's so exciting. It's sort of like, it's very hard for, there are lots of people throughout history who it's very hard to measure up to. I suppose Jesus Christ is probably another one. But the Doctor was played by more actors and therefore is more exciting. It could go anywhere. So I prefer the Doctor. I don't worship the Doctor, but my God, I really love the Doctor. And it's just this, the Doctor he's a hero, has always been there in my deepest, darkest moments, in my depressive moments. I've always remembered, well, there's this program. It's fun.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, I wrote scripts for Tom Baker, and I have a photo of me with Tom Baker. And I wrote for some of the other Doctors, and Paul McGann and Chris Eccleston, Sylvester McCoy. And it's just, you've written for your childhood hero. Who would have believed when you were 9 or 10 this would ever happen? And that is astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
I got a little choked up listening to you talk about that. I have to be honest with you. Because I think what's so lovely about that is that everything you were saying about the Doctor being there for you in the moments that are
Yeah.
perhaps the darker ones.
Yeah.
I think pretty much everyone I know that loves Doctor Who as much as they do, when you get outside of that sort of casual, yes, it's lovely, and if it's on, I'll watch it. But you get into the groups of people who do live, breathe, and just if I love that show, have that as well. There is that idea of being a little too smart for your own good when
Yes,
when you're younger.
absolutely.
And I it made me think so as I said, I got very obsessed with it in high school when it was on, and it was not cool at all. And it was something that I was just desperate for other people to know about and to want to like, because I just remember thinking it was so special and so different.
Oh, yeah.
I think I think maybe that's part of where the British obsession in that era came from in America, where it was so different. It was just so different than anything that was on, and it was just so joyous and lovely. And
Mm,
then you had these episodes that were much darker, and it was someone who could be very happy and could be very silly, but could also deal with something very serious
yeah.
and still be silly on the other side of it.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and I remember getting we had one British teacher in my high school, and she saw us watching Doctor Who in the library, and she was like, are you watching Doctor Who?" We were like, Absolutely."
Yep.
Um, and we ended up making a Doctor Who club, which is sort of that sort of thing where you can make a club of anything. You could,
Yeah.
as long as you got a teacher to say that they would be in charge of you and watch it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I remember we used to spend one lunch period a week, and we would try to get more people to watch it, because I think you had to have 5 people, like, as members for it to count. And we wanted our classroom and everything like that, and so I used to just make people watch it, and the people who wanted to watch and that fell in love with it were always the people who had something else going on, or felt like they didn't have somewhere else to eat lunch, or
Yeah.
those moments. And there was something so special about it, and I think it is one of those shows that does feel not only like you can be silly and have fun, but that you can have those darker moments, those moments.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a man at war to some degree.
He is. I think, though I say, like, Doctor Who is a show which is, I mean, always said it's always meant to be a very exciting program, and the Doctor is ultimately in most stories, usually. I think one of the great writers of Doctor Who in the 70s, Terence Dix, who wrote lots of the books as well, said the most of the plots start the same way. The TARDIS lands, the Doctor says, "Oh dear, something's gone wrong. You go that way and I'll go this way." And then lots of things will happen. And then it's got to be very exciting, very thrilling. At the end of the day, the Doctor does something terribly clever and they go away and do something else and they fly away. And that's what a Doctor Who usually is. But it's a show which, yes, the Doctor does come up against all sorts of desperately unpleasant individuals. It's and monsters and dictators and robots and small-minded, petty people. They're often the worst times. I think a lot of the writers, very few of us really have. Oh, I hope I say very few. Many of us, fortunately, do not have direct experience of sort of living under a genocidal dictator. But we do all sadly have experiences of dealing with very small-minded people, very people who lack compassion, who lack interest, who are very selfish, who are mean and unpleasant. And, we've all at some point been the subject of ridicule by people who shouldn't have and who really we were better than. But we didn't know that at the time. Because we were scared. Because of course you were scared. Of course we've all been scared, and especially as children, you're scared a lot of the time, and because you don't know how the world works. Even when you do know how the world works, you can be scared, and sometimes even more scared because you know that a lot of it doesn't really function at all properly. But I think to have a series which is unambiguously about, I think there is a sort of a strong moral and ethical sort of center point to Doctor Who, and it always changes and it always alters as time goes on, and it's always tricky to try and nail down exactly what the political center of Doctor Who is. And I don't think it really quite exists on a sort of left and right axis because of which era you're watching, and then the writers putting their own things and this and that. And there are some episodes which are very, very left liberal, and then there are some which are quite reactionary. It really depends on what you're looking at. But the center thing that drives through it all is, I think there's a scene, I think it's in one of Peter Capaldi's last episodes. He's talking to, and it shows how confusing Doctor Who can be, he's talking to two different incarnations of the same person. This person is the Master, who is the Doctor's greatest enemy, as of the 10th season, the 8th season of the show in old Doctor Who. Had never appeared before that point. That's Doctor Who can get to season 8 in the 1970s before he comes up with an arch enemy. He's talking to two versions of the Master, Michel Gomez and John Sim, and he's trying to plead with them to help him in an impossible situation. Lots of people are going to die, and they're going to be swept aside by the Cybermen, these relentless blank killers who do not care about anything. And he's trying to explain himself and why he's taking an impossible stand. And he says things like, I'm not doing it because it works, because it hardly ever does. I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent, and it's kind. It's just that. And there's something in that. And it feels so simplistic to say it, and yet it can often be difficult to be right. Not right as in winning the argument, but right as in the right thing, the thing that will help, that's genuinely going to help, the compassionate thing, the thing that's difficult, the self-sacrificing thing sometimes. And to be kind, that's in there. And it shouldn't be difficult to be kind. Everyone should be kind, but sometimes it's incredibly difficult to be kind when the people opposite you just aren't interested, don't care. But there's something to that as a Doctor, as a character. And the character who, let's be honest, the Doctor's a person of immense privilege because they can literally jump into, they don't need to pay the bills for a start. They can jump the TARDIS and go anywhere they want. But a character who at least is aware of the fact, I have these tremendous opportunities, I'm going to use them as best I can. I'm not going to go away and flaunt wealth and buy a planet and shoot up exorbitant rents for lots of poor people. I'm going to be a character who finds people who need help and helps them, or equips them with the tools to help themselves, and usually a bit of both. That's the kind of ethical centre. It's always a bit sort of misty, Doctor Who's ethical centre. But within it is someone who just wants to help and is absolutely furious that there could be anyone out there in the universe whose primary instinct is not to help those around them to lead a better life and to help them lead the best lives they can. And that's what Doctor Who is. I think that's very important for the show. And it's something that's very important to me as well. I am broadly speaking a pessimist. I'm very cynical. But the part of me, I think, that keeps me just about functioning in the optimistic sphere of things, I think comes from Doctor Who. I really think it does. Because at the end of the day, there's always been this weird person traveling through time and space that's trying to help people out. And I know they're fictional. But you know what? Thousands of people came together to make this character. They're not fictional. They are real. Actors and writers and directors and producers and lighting and tech and marketing and all these people came together to create this character. And it's their DNA that's in this character. And those people were real. And the things they said and did were real. So all the things the Doctor stands for are real. And that's very important to me. And I think that's very important to everyone who likes the show.
Yeah. Well, you're very. I've been talking about Doctor Who for years, and I think you've put your finger on it in such a way that I wish I could say that I could. And I think it was just quite lovely. I think the only other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I think it's a little selfish, but I think it fits with what we're talking about here. Is I think my episode that I tell people is one of the best episodes ever is the Vincent van Gogh episode.
Oh,
And I
yes.
think it touches on what you're talking about now is as for those who don't know, I suppose, or I hope you do, and if you haven't, you should watch the episode. But the doctor goes back and meets Vincent van Gogh and gives him a chance to see. I mean, there's a mystery. There's of course all of the building blocks of Doctor Who, but the
Mhm.
moment that just makes me cry every time I might cry thinking about it is is the moment where Vincent gets to walk in and see people
Yes.
just in awe of his art. And I think I remember thinking, "Oh, how wonderful that these people got to right a wrong of the universe." It's not true. This is not the real Vincent, and this never happened to him. But to have that power to get to say, "Well, this is what happened now."
Yes.
Yeah,
I think it is a wonderful episode. Also from the new Who season 5, Matt Smith's first
you're
season,
right.
the best
Yes.
season, Vincent and the Doctor. And of course, only Doctor Who would even try to do a story which is about examining the effects of depression
Mm.
while also giving you an adventure involving an invisible chicken monster.
Yes.
Like, written by Richard Curtis, no less. I mean, how bizarre! What a strange confluence of things. But it's a wonderful episode. It tries to do a lot in 45 minutes. And of course, if you could have made it a longer episode, but I think it does very well with the resources it has. I was really moved and touched by that episode. I also sort of liked how at the end, having given Vincent this wonderful opportunity, which clearly moves Vincent a great deal, we discover that history has not been changed, that Vincent will sadly, I believe, die very sadly, having claimed his own life. But they say, well, why do we do that? If it didn't make a difference. The Doctor goes, well, it does make a difference because that moment of happiness was real. It's a real moment of happiness. And that sometimes life is all about those happy moments. And the sad moments don't outweigh the happy ones. Hopefully we have more happy moments in our lives than sad ones, of course. And we strive for that, we work for that, and we strive for that for others. But whatever happens, the happy moments, no matter where they come from, or however long they last, they matter. They matter a huge amount, and they cannot have their matter. They can't matter less because there's a sad moment coming up or there was a sad moment beforehand. And I thought it was incredibly brave of this series, which is still broadly aimed at children, to do an episode that had that kind of that did move into that very murky area. And next week goes on to a totally different adventure. I'm glad that it paused to give us that, and I do think those scenes they're wonderfully written. They're terrifically acted and scored and directed. I think it's a wonderful episode. It is one of my favourites as well. Yeah. So I'm glad it's one of yours, or indeed your absolute favourite. It's a wonderful episode, and it's somehow telling that, and it's a mark of, I suppose, Doctor Who's general quality. Vincent and the Doctor it's a mid-season episode. It's just randomly there in the middle of a season. And, elsewhere you've got 2 episodes about lizard people underground, and you've got weeping angels and then vampire creatures in Venice. And it's like frills and spills. And then just they go, we've got 45 minutes to fill this week. oh no, let's do something so utterly powerful and heartbreaking that'll shake you to your very core. Let's just throw that together. Okay. We've got lizard people next week. That's what Doctor Who is.
Yeah.
Astonishing. How bizarre. Who would follow up Vincent and the Doctor with something like this? How utterly bizarre, but terrific.
Which is amazing.
Doctor Who. Keep being you, Doctor Who. Just keep doing it.
You just never change. Or continue changing, I suppose, is more so
Absolutely.
what we've said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never change what you are, and yet keep changing yourself in every possible way. That is apparently how Doctor Who has existed since 1963, and may it long continue to do so.
Yeah. Oh man, David, I could talk to you about this for hours and hours, but I think we've hit such a wonderful point that I think I'll ask you my question that I ask everyone, which is, if you had never seen Doctor Who, what about you would be different as a person?
Everything would be different. There was a time when I tried to shy away from admitting that, when I thought, oh, you can't have been so influenced by a program. Surely you're an adult person. You can't have been, even now, you can't have been so influenced. And there, of course, there are many other influences in my life. And many of the people who influenced me terrifically have been real people who I've actually met. I've been incredibly shaped by the people I've grown up with, the people around me, and a number of friends who, without those people, I wouldn't be who I am. I don't think without other people I'd really exist in any real, tangible way. One of the defining mantras that fans of Wooden Overcoats kept picking out was that each finale would include the phrase, other people are all there is. And it's a statement I've interrogated from numerous points of view and will probably continue to do so. It's also something I kind of believe, that without other people, I wouldn't be who I am, and I don't think you be who you are, and everybody else would be who they are. But Doctor Who, it has, from a professional side, it's probably the thing that made me want to be a writer. It certainly made me want to be an actor, and I do occasionally still act, but I was a rather better writer than an actor, so I got more work there. But it was where a lot of my sense of humour came from. It's where a lot of my sort of my moral and ethical outlook came from. The tools to question that outlook came from, to question other people and things, and to question the rules, and which things were right and what was wrong, and to then always keep questioning that. Never have a very rigid ideal, always question that. It's where I got some bits of my sartorial sense, my fashion sense. I wear velvet jackets. John Pertwee used to wear them, so did Peter Capaldi. From a young age, I realised I actually quite liked wearing lapelled jackets and shirts and being smart casual all the time. So that comes from there. I think it's just, I think without Doctor Who, I don't know what else I'd have watched. I don't know what else I'd have been a fan of that could have influenced me to the same degree. That could have done so much for me, that made me the person that I am and was always going to be there. And I think, I really think it helps that Doctor Who is a show that over the many years, nearly 60 years that it's been on in some form, can be really good and can be really bad, because it gives you an honest assessment of how most things are.
Yeah.
That sometimes when you're in your work or in your life and all this, sometimes you will reach the absolute pinnacles and you'll go, oh yes, this is terrific. And sometimes it will be Time Lash, that rubbish story from the 1980s I watched earlier today, where practically nothing goes right, but everyone involved would go on to do better things, and they did better things before it. Sometimes life's like that. That's helpful. I think Doctor Who, for all that it's a show about travelling through time and space in a police box, is a terrifically grounding show when it needs to be. And that's, it's taught me so many things. If I really sat down and thought about it more, I'm thinking all this off the top of my head. If I sat down and tried to list it, I'm sure there are so many life lessons that Doctor Who told me. And I think most of them were lessons that it was probably good to learn. Yeah. I'm sure it's taught me some things I shouldn't. I eat far too many jelly babies for a start, so I should probably cut back on those. But overall, I'd say its net value is supremely good. Without Doctor Who, I would not be me in really any way, I think. I'm not sure who I'd be, but I wouldn't be me. And I don't think I'd like the person that I would be if I weren't me, I think.
Oh, that was very well said. I think you should never give up your jelly babies. You should enjoy them. They're delicious, and that's why they're just so good.
Yeah, they are really good. They're very Moorish. That's why I keep eating them.
Yeah, and then they're just right there as well. It's like just a couple more.
There's a bag in arm's reach right now.
They're literally right there.
They're right here.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for sharing with me and with everyone else. I think this was just I know for me I got quite emotional, so just quietly over here. So I hope everyone else enjoyed it and I really appreciate you joining me. I had a great time.
No, thank you very much. And thank you. I've enjoyed talking about it. I love talking about Doctor Who. I don't, surprisingly, to be honest, I don't talk about often enough. So this has been great just to sit here and talk about something enthusiastically and just lovingly. We should all do that more often. I don't really like sitting down and talking about the things I don't like.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the things I do like.
I agree.
Because,
Everybody should be talking about I think that's that's really the goal with this show, right? Is to spend an hour or so just talking about something that just brings you joy and changes who you are, I
absolutely.
think.
Because
So,
I remember being, in my sort of teenage years when you become very cynical and you think that tearing things down is really funny all the time and writing a negative review is intrinsically hilarious and witty. But there is a line in, I think it's one of the Doctor Who, it's a tiny side special. It's one where David Tennant's Doctor meets Peter Davison's Doctor, and it's like a 5-minute sketch. And he has a line which is, before you, my fifth incarnation, before you, I was all trying to be grumpy and important like you do when you're young. And then I became you. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I think my mum looked at me. I was watching that with my mum at the time. She looked at me because she said, yeah, I remember the time when you always were trying to be very, very, serious. And I'm taking myself very seriously. I'm very grumpy because I'm a very serious child. And then eventually you're not.
yeah.
That time, I hope we all get beyond that, because actually the time when you just look at things and go, that's fun. Let's talk about that. Yeah. That's what I want. I want more of that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I tried not to reveal this about myself, but I feel I have to. I will say Doctor Who is one of those shows that made me realize, or perhaps I just loved it so much that I wasn't willing to be serious about it or pretend that I didn't love it as much as I did. Because in that high school Doctor Who club, we managed to get school funding to buy a life-size cutout of David Tennant with the
Oh,
TARDIS, which we
yeah.
kept in the window of that. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? Yeah, this is how I feel. If you,
Oh, absolutely.
it's something that you just, I think it does transcend that childhood desire or teenage, I suppose, desire to be
Yeah.
cool.
I think, earlier I asked, the ways in which it's changed me. I hadn't even begun to say how Doctor Who probably influenced my sexuality. Oh, God, I could go on for another hour on that. It is one of the campest shows ever made. Like, oh, it's ridiculous and oh, it's wonderful. It's so over the top. There is, I'll finish all this, but there is one, the seventh Doctor, Sylvester McCoy, his tenure, his 3 years on the show begins with a character called the Rani, played by Kate O'Mara, who's this woman with huge 80s shoulder pads, and she struts into the TARDIS, and he's unconscious, so's the companion, Bonnie Langford. She struts in with a giant gun, with all this sort of big sort of 80s makeup, and goes, leave the girl, it's the man I want, and struts out again. And they go, yeah, that's terrific. This level of supreme powered camp that could power a solar system. Yes, that's what I want. I could, there's so much more. I could go on for another 3 hours. I shouldn't. So I'll leave it at that. But find that.
Oh
You'll
my
find it on
goodness.
YouTube.
I will
You
have
find it on
to.
YouTube, Lord.
I will have to not only find it on YouTube, but bug you to talk about it for hours later. We'll have have another chat. We'll have to do a part 2. No, well, man, it really is. It's always so hard to end these because it's just you're just having such a good time. But I will let you have the rest of your day. So thank you thank you so much for joining me. And I hope everyone enjoyed. And if you have not listened to Wooden Overcoats, you absolutely must. And David, do you have something new coming out that people can look forward to other than your Doctor Who Big Finish that won't come out until 2025?
I have, absolutely. I have a few of those coming out here and there, but the main thing I've got coming out is my new scripted comedy series called Cry Havoc, Ask Questions Later, which is a new comedy about the fall of the Roman Republic. It's about basically people winning power over Rome and then realizing they have no idea what to do with it and trying frantically to make things work and usually making things worse. That's coming from Rusty Quill. And that will be coming later this year. I cannot remember exactly when, but certainly later this year. And it's being recorded at the moment. It's very exciting. We have, as well as myself, another 8 writers on there. It's going to be a wonderful show, terribly funny. So if you like historical comedy written by me, well, you are absolutely quids in, because that's coming later this year. So subscribe to that when you can, and it will be wonderful. Absolutely marvelous.
I am certain it will, because you've only written good things. So, and we can thank Doctor Who for that, I suppose.
Oh, yes,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
all right. Well, I'll see everybody else next week, and thanks for hanging out, David.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again to David for joining us and for sharing so much about himself today. And thank you for tuning in every week to listen. We'll be back next Wednesday with Ester Ellis, a respected writer and sound designer in the audio space. And we'll be talking about how the hit Netflix series Stranger Things changed her for the better. If you want to keep up with us between now and then, you can join us on our website and sign up for our newsletter at tandonproductions.com, or you can find me and let me know what you thought about the episode on all social platforms at Marissa Kumari. I hope you had a good time with us today, and I will see you next Wednesday.